My name is Bobby, and I have always been fascinated by the human psyche. What motivates people to do the things they do? Back in 1981, 2 innocent victims were senselessly murdered in this field in Mesquite, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. No motive could ever be determined. I've come back to my hometown, Mesquite, to talk to some of the people that were close to the case and try to figure out how and why this happened. The year was 1981. Ronald Reagan became the 40th President of the United States. A new soap opera called Dynasty premiered.
Oh, you miserable bitch!
And Olivia Newton-John's Physical hit #1 and was there for 10 weeks straight. And the Rolling Stones performed 2 sold-out shows at the Cotton Bowl. But as the year was coming to a close, in fact, 2 days before Christmas, the quiet community of Mesquite, Texas was suddenly shaken up by one of the most tragic and mysterious crimes to have ever plagued the area. Back in 1981, Mesquite was largely rural as compared to what it looks like today. We're looking at the southeast edge of the city, where there used to be an old gravel dirt road called Holloman's Road. One end started on Lawson Road and cut down through a field. Once you were down several hundred yards, it did a sharp little zig and zag before it made its way to Cartwright Road where it ended. At the first zig was reportedly an old house at one point. Unfortunately, there's little, if any, information available about it, but I know at some point before 1981 it burned down. The property is listed in some articles as a joint venture with Lucas Farms, which was a dairy farm that was just behind where the house stood. This would make sense because the road serves as a shortcut from Lawson to Cartwright Road running along the back side of Lucas Farms. But by the late 70s and early 80s, the land where the house was had been abandoned. However, the gravel road remained, and some Mesquite residents who were in the know would venture down it, if they dared.
So Holloman Road, I'm real familiar with Holloman Road. A lot of mean stuff happened on Holloman Road. A lot. I mean, it was not a road you wanted to go down.
If you were driving down it, it did look scary. I'll admit I used to take my brothers out there and try to scare them.
So I am standing at where Old Holloman Road used to come up, and I don't think I'm not supposed to be here, but I don't know, it's kind of weird. Now, directly in front of me, we're gonna have where the road actually runs, and there's a lot of brush here, so I don't know if I'll be able to get through, but let's see what we got. Yeah, that's gonna be very hard to get to. Well, and there's a fence too. Yeah, I can definitely see the gravel through there, but I'm disappointed that we can't get in there. I'm gonna figure this out though, I'm not giving up yet. On December 23rd, 1981, a Dallas County officer named Roy Baird was driving down Lawson Road at about 11:45 and happened to notice a blue Thunderbird pulled over on the wrong side of Old Holloman Road. The driver's side door was wide open, which the deputy found odd and immediately felt like something was not right. He made a turn down the road and pulled up in front of the car. He got out and touched the hood, which was still very warm, so he knew that it hadn't been parked there very long. The vehicle was unoccupied. However, he noticed a woman's purse in the back seat, as well as a little blue round sports bag sitting in the passenger seat, along with a pair of women's gloves. The deputy knew that if the woman's purse was sitting in the car, that she couldn't be too far away. He felt that someone was in trouble and started looking around. and worked his way through some brush that was on the other side of the driver's door. He walked about 100 feet into the field when he came upon something he wasn't prepared to see. There, laying in close proximity to each other, were the bodies of a young woman and next to her, a young boy. The deputy touched the young boy and his body was still warm. He could tell this had just happened within minutes, so he pulled his gun and started scanning the field for the culprit. There was no one in sight. He went back to his car and called for backup. Detective Larry Forsythe had been attending the office Christmas lunch when he got the call about the homicides. He arrived shortly afterwards. After looking in the purse found in the back seat of the car, he identified the female as 30-year-old Roxann Jeeves, and then quickly determined that the little boy was her son, 5-year-old Kristopher. It was heartbreaking enough that this 5-year-old's life was cut short in such a horrific way, but what made it worse was that day was his 5th birthday. Detective Forsythe next examined the blue round sports bag, and its contents were quite interesting. It contained a black knit hat, a roll of duct tape, ammunition, what looked like a small vanilla extract bottle, which later was discovered to be formaldehyde, an antique revolver holster, and a small little notebook. Also in the car, there were cigarette butts retrieved from the ashtray. A Mesquite resident who happened to be driving down Lawson that morning came to the sheriff's office shortly afterwards to tell them about the strange encounter she had had the morning of the murders.
It was December the 23rd. It was morning. I was 19 years old, and my mother had rudely woken me up to take my grandmother to Christmas shopping. And I was not exactly the happiest camper in the world to start out with. But I was going down Lawson Road in my brand new Firebird, listening to Cashmere, and I looked over and saw a man running across the field almost at the corner. I was almost at the corner of Lawson and Cartwright. And I stopped my car because I thought he was one of Mr. Lucas's farm workers. And back then, there was nothing out there. It was just pretty much open prairie and farmland. Most of the people that lived out there were home places. You might see a house every 2 miles. It was just very remote. So I stopped my car thinking that somebody needed help, and he was waving his hands at me. So I stopped, and I could see him running towards me. But I was 19 years old and really didn't want to be there. And I looked up and saw a Dallas County sheriff coming towards me. So I said, well, we'll just let him handle him. And I drove off. In my rearview mirror, I could see the guy just bend over like he was out of breath, like I had just driven off from him because he was waiting for me to let him get in my car. I did not know until later in the day that there had been a murder. My mother was calling my grandmother's house later that morning, telling me not to come home, not to come home. The police were out there. And I told them, I said, I saw a guy in that area running. So I spent my Christmas in 1981 at the Dallas County Sheriff's Department.
Detectives scoured the area around where the crime took place, looking for witnesses who might have seen or heard something. Connie Helms was visiting her father at their family house, which was in pretty close proximity to Old Holloman Road.
I had gone out to my dad to visit. Dad and I were sitting on the porch with the kids when we heard 3 gunshots. We didn't think nothing about it because people hunt out there all the time. But we're sitting on the porch when in a little while, here comes a man of color walking down the road. And we made the comment, wonder how he got stranded out here with no wheels, right? And as he was passing the house, he stopped and he asked my dad 2 questions. And I do not remember which question came first. But one of them was, could he use the phone? Dad told him no. He asked if he could have a drink of water. And Dad told him no and to get on down the road before he sick the dog on him. And he continued walking up Cartwright. A short time after that, here comes all these cop cars. I ain't a bunch of them. And still didn't think anything of it. Dad and I said, well, guess somebody got trigger happy on their hunting trip and shot their partner. So we still thinking it's a hunting accident, right?
Mhm.
That night on the news, I heard about the murder on Holloman Road, and I called Dad.
A stuffed animal is the poignant reminder of the young boy who lived in this far north Dallas apartment with his mother, Roxann Jeeves. Both were found shot execution style. The suspect, an unknown black male, seen wearing this ski cap and a Green Army jacket around the apartment complex where the victims lived. Roxann Jeeves and her 5-year-old son were last seen at this Texaco station at LBJ and Abrams. The memory of that still haunts the service station attendant, Don Crawford, probably the last person to see them alive.
I hate that it happened. I wished I could forget it. I wish they'd catch it.
45 minutes later, the bodies were found in this field in a remote part of southeast Dallas County. In a press conference today, Chief Investigator Gus Rose displayed a number of personal items apparently left behind by the killer. Investigators feel the most memorable is the ski cap with the obscene emblem. The suspect has also been seen in the company of a Mexican or Indian woman. Bob Letter, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas.
Dad wouldn't give the police any information on me because they did go and talk to him. But he didn't want us to get involved.
As the investigation continued, more information about the victims became known. Roxann Jo Jeeves was born in North Tonawanda, New York in 1951. She was the oldest of 3 children. She was a bright young woman, went to college at the University of Ohio in Cincinnati, and then moved to Oklahoma with her husband and their child, Kristopher. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last, and Roxann and Kristopher left Oklahoma for Dallas to start a new life. Roxann moved into the Sussex Place apartments on LaMonda Street in northeast Dallas, seen here. Today, the apartment complex is still there. The only thing that's changed is the name. Detectives scoured the nearby neighbors to find out if they saw anything suspicious that morning. Roxann's next-door neighbor recounted that on the morning of the murders at around 10:30, she walked out of her apartment to see little Kristopher struggling down the stairs toward his mother's car with a big red toolbox. As she hurried across the parking lot toward her car, she turned around to see something she found disquieting. She then saw what she described as an African-American male, accompanied by a dark-complected female, who seemed to be approaching Kristopher in a furtive manner. When she got to her car, she looked back one more time, and this time she saw the black male carrying the toolbox in one hand and holding Kristopher's hand with the other. All 3 of them, including the woman, were headed in the opposite direction around the building to the parking lot. This was the last time she saw them. She later sat down with police sketch artists to produce a sketch of the suspect male. Over the coming days in Dallas, this sketch would become widespread through media. One last witness contacted the sheriff 8 days after the murders. She was a gas attendant who worked at the mobile station at Interstate 635 and Cartwright Road, about 6 miles west of the crime scene. She recalled at around noon what she described as a black male walked into the station and asked to use their phone. She refused, directing his attention to the outside payphone. After he made his call, he headed up north on foot on Interstate 635. Today, the gas station is still there, although the payphone that was used is long gone. All right, so I've made it out here to where it's all being cleared. Yeah, this is it. Over here, it looks like what used to be a pond, and I remember seeing in pictures there was a pond. Of course, it's dried up now, but this looks like it was probably that pond that, if I'm not mistaken, Roxann and Kristopher were found in semi-close proximity to that pond. I am walking now over to where I believe the road was. It's pretty amazing. But we're going to keep going here because I'm not one to give up easily. You know, they've always said that you get an eerie feeling down here. And this is the first time I've actually come down this deep into the area. But it is kind of eerie. I can't explain it. This case has stuck with me ever since I heard about it, and really want to keep their memory alive. At this point, I had arrived on Holloman Road, and I'm just realizing it. I was speechless. Wow. This is something. I'm standing where old Holloman Road used to be. In fact, you can see some of the gravel here. Most of it is covered up with years of mud and dirt from flooding from the creek over here. But I do know it ran along the telephone poles back here. And this would be it right here. Wow. This is something. Once Roxann and Kristopher were taken to the medical examiner, autopsies were conducted. Roxann had been shot twice in the head on each side of her face, as if she had been shaking her head back and forth as she was being shot. When her body was discovered in the field off Holloman Road, she was partially covered in a blanket. Little Kristopher was shot once in the head at point-blank range. The gunshot literally knocked the boy out of his shoes. His body was laying just a few feet from Roxann's. It was also found that Roxann had been sexually assaulted and that the perpetrator left behind biological evidence. Now keep in mind that DNA wasn't even a thing at this time, but Dallas detectives were forward-thinking. They were smart enough to know that technology was advancing at a rapid speed, and that perhaps one day this kind of evidence could lead them to the killer. So they retained it all, which included some hair that was found in the cap, as well as the cigarette butts found in the ashtray of the Thunderbird.
And from that point on, I was petrified because he had not been found. Because I eventually moved out of my parents' house as soon as I turned 20, which was the next month. And I started moving every 2 years around Dallas because the man had seen me and he had seen my car, and I was terrorized by this man for a very long time. I would call the sheriff's office all of the time asking, is there any information? And there was none.
Years later, I was watching Unsolved Mysteries, and they had the case on there. Now, I made a mental picture of this man. I called after seeing Unsolved Mysteries and told them I could identify the guy, and I didn't hear anything from them. Years later, they aired it again, and I called again. I told him I believe I can identify this guy. That time, a guy named Forsythe, and it seems like there were 3 other guys that came to my house, and they came with a lot of photos. And I went through those photos rather quickly, so the last 2 photos I had to stop and look at. And so when I told them this was the man that I think I saw in front of Dad's house, one of them actually got excited, and the other 3 were just sitting there. And one of them asked me, they said, I thought you said he had hair. And I looked at that photo, and this guy was bald. I mean, he'd been shaved, right? And I could have sunk to the floor because I said, well, I thought I could identify him because the man did have hair, and this guy didn't. But then they showed another photograph, and I'm looking at it, and this guy's got hair. And I look at it real close, and I told him I might be crazy, but these pictures here, this is the same man. And it was.
The man that Connie identified was George Washington Hicks. Hicks had been incarcerated since 1994. in prison in Huntsville, serving an 80-year sentence for aggravated sexual assault. He was also serving 2 15-year sentences for aggravated sexual assault and robbery by threat. The detective got excited because, unbeknownst to Connie, they had identified George Washington Hicks through DNA evidence. They just needed a witness to link him to the scene.
And they asked me if I knew anybody else that had seen anything. And no, I didn't. But then I was on this Mesquite site, and that's where I found Tamara. And she made a comment about the Holloman Road murder. So I sent her a message.
I did not know until many, many years later at a Facebook post that he had actually been caught. And that's whenever I believe Connie saw my remarks on a Facebook post, and that's how they got a hold of me. Because the original paperwork, they had me listed as Tammy Burton, and my last name was Barton. And I haven't been Tamara Barton for 30 years now, actually 32. But they didn't know where I was. The police couldn't even find me until Connie saw the post, and I think that's what spun them off of coming to find me.
Told her that they were looking for other witnesses. At first, she said no, her husband didn't want her to get involved. But then she did become involved. And between the two of us, he got put away. So thank you, Tamara, because I felt so all alone.
And the fact that DNA eventually caught this rascal, it's just amazing to me. DNA is great. I know a lot of people have problems with it, but this one served justice.
If you like the content of this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified when new videos are posted.